Misty, who was introduced to you earlier this morning, is our next speaker. And while I didn't get a chance to talk to her at lunch, I think she was very disappointed that she didn't get all that many questions after her first presentation. So be thinking of questions that you can ask her about her presentation on soybeans. Misty?
Okay, I need that thing. I am the most excited about this presentation. This was a lot of fun. So as much fun as it is getting out in the field and planting crops and hanging out with farmers, the whole reason we do the research is to dig into the data and bring information back to you guys. That's what I got to do this spring, or this winter, the past 2 months, and I'm pretty excited to show you what I found. It answered a few questions, but it brought up a lot more, so it should be fun. So, the story of soybean seeding rates. I'll have an introduction for you. Chapter 1, we're going to go into plant population. Chapter 2, yield. Chapter 3, previous crop. What does that have to do with soybean population? Did it affect it or not? Seeding equipment. Drill versus planter. Everyone always asks me that. And then chapter 5, we'll look at PEI. And actually, I kind of blended PEI in there as I went along. And of course, the moral of the story, that's what we're all dying to know. What are the factors affecting our population? Why did I show you a graph this morning that said that there was no difference between seeding rates? Why? That doesn't make sense. You put more seeds in the ground, you should have more plants come out, you should have more beans. That's not what it's showing. So that's what we're looking at. So we have over 40 sites across the Maritimes from 2015 to 2019. I took all of that data and I cleaned it. I cleaned it by removing fields where data was incomplete. We might have plant population counts, but then deer rampaged the field and we had no harvest. We might have had a field that was a complete crop loss. Like in 2019, we had 0.3 ton to the acre. I took that out. It skews the results unfairly. So in the end, I ended up with 170 results. I treated the germination as a variable, along with variety, fertilizers applied, and soil fertility. And there's no stats done on these trends yet. It's just trends. We're just looking at this. Stats will be the next step. So we had the treatments of 90, 110, 130, 160, and 190,000 seeds per acre. So chapter 1, plant population. The difference between seeding rate and plant populations. This is very important. Before I can go anywhere else, we have to get this down. Seeding rate is the desired population by calibrating your equipment. You set your tractor and your equipment to seed 160,000 seeds per acre. The plant population is the actual number of plants per acre growing in your field. Big difference there sometimes. So seeding rate is our target. Plant population is the actual. So this is a graph of our seeding rates. So here's our target. Here's our actual. At 90, our plant population varied from 58,000 seeds per acre to 137. Our average was smack on, 90,000 seeds per acre. As we start increasing our seeding rate, the variability in our plant population really widens out. So when we were aiming for 190,000 seeds per acre, in actuality we got between 96 and 391,000 seeds per acre. Big difference. On PEI, your trend was the same. At 90,000, pretty accurate. As we increased our seeding rate, the accuracy went down and we ended up overseeding a lot of the time. The results of each treatment were then divided into 3 groups. Because I often get the question of, yeah, you say that there's no difference in yield based on seeding rate, but what if it's because of plant population? So I took out that variable. Instead of looking at all of the seeding rates, I looked at our target population. So I looked at all the results that fit in that target population. So if we were aiming at planting 90,000 seeds per acre, I looked at all the yield results from the fields that were plus or minus 20% of 90,000 plants per acre. So we can take out the variable of plant population affecting our yield. This is how accurate we were. So this orange color here, that is all the fields that were within that target. So at 90,000 seeds per acre, only 32% of our fields were within target population. The other 30% were above, the other 30% were below. At 110, we did pretty good. 58% of fields were within target. At 160, 57% were within target. Very few were below. And I found this interesting because I thought, I wonder why we're so good at planting 160,000 seeds per acre. My first thought was because we're all used to planting at 160,000 seeds per acre. It's a pretty typical planting rate. You guys know how fast to drive. You know what to set your tractors at. You know what to set your seeders at. As far as why 110 did so good, I don't know, you tell me. Maybe you were planting slower. 190,000 seeds per acre, we started to get down low again. And this is where I found was really interesting, is one of our highest percents was above. So even though we were trying to hit 190, which was much higher than our normal planting rates, we were still above target, about 30% of the time. How much does missing the target cost you? When I put this together, I was stunned. When we look at 90,000 seeds per acre, our target seed cost is about 51 bucks an acre. It's about 80 bucks for a bag of seed. You get 140,000 seeds per acre. That's how I did the math on that. So if we're over target, we are spending $10 to $27 per acre more than we thought we were. We start getting down into 190,000 seeds per acre, and you saw our highest seeding rate was like 391. We were thinking we were spending about $109 an acre. We were actually spending between $22 and $115 per acre more than you budgeted for. Like, that's enormous. Like, your profit is gone. And we were above target 38% of the time. That's important stuff to know. Like, this, pay attention to how fast you're driving, pay attention to how many seeds you're using. If you run out of seed, you should be wondering why. Who's driving the seeder? So how did PEI do in comparison to the Maritimes? PEI rocked at planting 110,000 seeds per acre. 75% of the fields were within target. You guys also were really good at 160,000 seeds per acre. None of them were below target. 190? Yeah, that's a lot of seed. That's actually 56% above target. So 56% of the time, you could be spending between $20 and $115 an acre more than you think you are. That's a huge number. At the 90,000 seeds per acre, you're actually doing more over or below target than the average for the Maritimes. But here, you guys were above the Maritime average. So before I go on to chapter 2, any questions on that first section? Yes?
Was there enough data to decide whether there was a difference between grain drill planting and planters planting?
That is chapter 4, I think. We're coming. So chapter 2, yield. How can we compare yields of seeding rates when the actual plant populations have such a wide range? This is why I looked at that target population and I looked at the yields that fell within the target plant population. So that eliminates the variability of emergence. When you look at the plus or minus of a plant population, we actually fit in with just about every plant population you can think of. So it covers all your planting rates. So this is what it looks like. It's kind of interesting. At 90,000, 110, 130, 160, 190, our average is pretty straight line. We have a bit of a bump at 160, which I like. This gray line here is your maximum. So this is the maximum yield. This is the minimum yield that we saw within each of those populations. And remember, this is plant populations targeted for that seeding. So when we look at the yields by seeding rate without looking at the target plant population, this is including all of the results, and we narrow it down by just what fits in that target, sometimes the story changes, and sometimes it's confirmed. So with the 90,000, looking at all of the planting rates, it looks like we had a really high potential yield. But when you eliminate the plant populations and you only look at what actually was 190,000 seeds per acre, it changes the story. It really reduces that high maximum yield. And sometimes it keeps the story the same. I told you this morning, there's no difference in yield. I'm telling you now, there's no difference in yield. Interesting. Then we look at all of the data, and Alan asked me, he said, Misty, put that in a graph. I want to see a scatter plot of that. Yield does not correspond or trend with plant population. This is showing you the yield versus the plant population. If it trended, we should see an increase in yield as we increase with plants. We're not. It's just a big mess. It's flat. There's no difference. They do not equal. So if you were to say to me, oh, I'm going to get a big yield this year, I'm going to double the amount of plants I put in the ground, I'm going to say you're going to waste double the amount of money. Because it's not showing us that result. The economics of yield. This is where it gets really fun. And when I'm working with all of you guys, you're always asking me, where does it pay? And really, its profitability is what matters. So just hang out with me here for a minute, because numbers get confusing. So I assume that a bag of seed costs 80 bucks. The value of your soybeans is about 400 bucks a ton, give or take. Don't hang me out to dry on that one. What I looked at was our average, our minimum, and our maximum yield at each planting rate. I looked at our target cost. So if I'm planting 90,000 seeds per acre, this is what it should cost me to do that. Then I looked at our net per acre. Now I have net in red to remind me to tell you that all I did was take the yield, times it by what you can sell that yield for, subtract the cost of seeding. That's our net. There's no tractor fees and fungicides and fertility and all your other expenses that go into planting that crop. That's all I took out. But what this shows us is that at 90,000, your average return could be $350. If you get a low yield, you might make 116. If you get a high yield, you can make as much as 561. When you get down to 190, your average yield, you're only going to make about $277 an acre. At maximum, you're only going to make 388. Now look at 130 and 160. This is where it gets fun, because in that block, you're going to have good potential for an average yield. You're going to have some of the highest return, even if you have a bad yield, and you're maximizing your yield potential. So there we're looking at some really fun seeding rates. Like, okay, we may not have much difference in yield, but when we look at the cost to put that seed in the ground, this is where we're coming out. So for PEI yield, I wanted to see if there was the same trend on the island as there was on the Maritimes, and in fact there is. The only difference that we really see is this 110. There was a lower yield here, but the story about the 160 is the same. Highest yield potential, minimum risk. Any questions on my yield? You guys are good? You stayed with me on that one? Okay, previous crop. Aaron has been talking about rotation impacting yields for years. And I thought this was really cool because he could just give this presentation for this section. I considered when looking at the previous crop only, not the type of rotation. So I didn't consider if it was a potato rotation, I just looked at what last year's crop was. I looked at it for the effect of crop residue, seed bed, fertility. I would have thought, hands down, planting after grain corn, you're gonna have lower population because of trash. Previous crops included wheat, barley, and oats. I grouped barley and oats together because there are so few. Soybeans, corn, potatoes, and forage. And this is what we came up with. I looked at what was within plant population and how many were within target. So did the previous crop affect our plant population? And the story is really the same. We had some within 65 to 55%. Most of them were 40 to 30%. When we looked at our overall yield across everything, I think it was around 43%. So we didn't see much of a difference in affecting the previous crop as I thought we would. I thought that we would see a much bigger difference. Because in corn, if it was truly a matter of the crop residue, we wouldn't have crops over. Because you would be losing seed. You would see a lot under, but to see stuff over, it's like, oh, well, that can't necessarily be crop residue then. It must be something else going on that I'm not catching yet. What I thought was really interesting is the amount that was over target in potatoes. When I look at yields, and this is where I bring Aaron in, because I think this is really cool. There is a bigger variation in yields when you separate it by previous crop than there is when you look at it by planting population. 190 to 90,000, pretty much a flat line. You look at it between crops and you're seeing from 0.76 to 1.12. We didn't see as much variation between planting populations as we did with previous crops. Forage came out ahead as the highest yielding crop to follow. And I was talking with somebody at lunchtime. One of the things that I think might play into a factor of that is usually in a forage rotation, there's livestock. So are we seeing an effect of manure in there? Previous crops, average yields by previous crops and seeding rate. So I separated it out. I looked at all of the previous crops, but I pulled out corn, potatoes, and forage for you just to bring your attention to this, is when we're following potatoes, we actually have higher yields on the lower population rates. So this is 90, that's 110. I pulled out corn because I would have anticipated the lower population rates of corn to have a lower yield. There was really no effect when we followed corn on yield, regardless of the planting population. With forages, the higher planting populations gave us a little bit more yield. Do I know the answer why? No, I just think it's interesting.
Ryan, you've got a question?
I was just wondering, is the corn, was it green corn or corn silage?
This is actually a mix between the two. Yeah, I had to group them because I didn't have enough specific data to be able to say one way or another if it was corn or high moisture, or sorry, silage or high moisture. So there is a difference in trash in crop residue for sure. Did you have a question? The N values?
What's those N value under there? What's that mean?
Did I have those on a
No, no, what's the, like, what? Oh, they just told me it's population, okay.
Sorry, I still didn't hear you.
On the slide there, I was wondering what N equals 54, what's that mean?
Oh yeah, that's the number of this year. This is the number of plots. So that's the number of data points that I had. So I have a lot of, that's a lot of data points to be able to draw that conclusion from.
It's all one acre.
Yes.
in your ends, those are all on individual farms and minimum plot size of 1 acre
That's correct.
being managed on a commercial basis.
Yep. So all of this data is coming from our on-farm agronomy that I talked to you about this morning. Minimum 1 acre crop, 1 acre trial with 1/4 of an acre harvested. So it's a lot of data over a lot of variables. And so when you see 54 points, we're getting 54 pieces of data off of potentially 54 different farms, but at the very least 54 different fields. That's a lot of variability across the Maritimes. So now we go into seeding equipment. Did the seeding equipment influence plant population? People always say like, oh yeah, you know, your seeders, that's just a controlled spill. Planters are the way to go, more accurate. But for the most part, the majority, the large majority of people probably in this room use seeders, not planters. And that was the case with the majority of this trial, is that it was done by drill. The drills were all calibrated, well, and the planters too, were all calibrated prior to planting the trial for each seeding rate. You open up the lid, you'll have your little chart there, it'll tell you what you're supposed to do. I looked at that for a starting point, and then we actually calibrated from there. And when you look at the seed size, it'll tell you how to, you can just calibrate it down from that. We did the math. We knew exactly how many pounds per acre that we wanted to put on based on the size of the seed that you were using. Bada boom, bada bing, we have our calibration, and off we go. When we look at equipment accuracy overall, the planter does a more accurate job. What this doesn't show, though, is the breakdown by population. And even though the planter was more accurate overall, the drill and the planter were the same at the lower planting rates. So 90 and 110, there was no difference between accuracy with your planter and your drill. It was only at the higher seeding rates that the planter really came ahead. So now we move on to the moral of the story. This is what you all wanted to know. Plant populations, seeding rates and plant populations do not trend together with yields. I showed you that on that scatter plot. The highest yield was 2.16 metric tons. We got that in Pictou County, Nova Scotia in 2016, and it was planted with a drill. The plant population that ended up giving us this yield, 148,000 plants per acre. The highest planting population, 391,674 seeds per acre. That is a lot. It happened in 2015. It was done with a drill, and it yielded 1.4 metric tons per acre. Not shabby yield, but boy, that's a lot of seeds. The difference in the return per acre on that, $778 an acre versus 326. Now, if he had gotten this yield at that, he would have been much better off, or she. So the moral of the story, we need to improve accuracy. We need to stop overseeding. We need to do a better job calibrating. It's not about not using your drill anymore. We just need to be more aware of our calibration ahead of time. Look at our planter calibration, look at our driving speed, seed bed prep. Yield, plant population, and yield do not trend together. I can't tell you that enough. There's no difference in yield between 90, 110, 130, and 190. We only saw that bump in yield at 160. 160,000 seeds per acre is showing a greater potential for yield when seeded at the target population. My recommendation, plant between 130 and 160,000 seeds per acre. Minimize your risk of a low yield. Maximize the risk of a high yield while keeping your seeding costs as low as possible. Previous crop. Previous crop impacts plant population. The lowest percent within target was following corn. The highest percent within target was following soybeans. It impacts yields. The lowest yield was following grain. The highest yield was following forage. Moral of the story, it's best yields to plant after forage potatoes or corn. So anybody who's growing potatoes would be happy to hear that. We won't get into what potatoes do to organic matter and stuff like that, but seeding equipment. The planter was more accurate with 61% within target population. Use a planter if you have one. If you don't have one, calibrate your drill. Thoughts and questions. Like I said, this brought up almost more questions than it answered for me. Higher plant population doesn't equal higher yield. Why not? We didn't look at weed pressure. When you have 90,000 seeds per acre, is there a weed factor in there? When you have 190,000 seeds per acre, there shouldn't be as much weeds in there. You should have faster canopy closure. There's more and more questions that come up. No-till versus tillage. Seedbed prep. How does that play a role? Effective pH and fertility on below target population. Is that why we're seeing below target population? Or is it simply mechanical tractor, seeder, planter issues? And variety. The variety one's going to be interesting because I took a quick peek at variety and we have so many different varieties that the N values start to get fairly low. So there might be a way for me to group varieties together by heat unit, by some different genetic factors that they may have to try to keep our numbers a little bit higher, but I don't know, haven't really dug into that one yet. It'll be interesting to see if that plays a factor as well. Any other thoughts or questions that you guys have to add to this, to say, hey, maybe it's this? Disease pressure and what? Wind? Oh, row width, yes. And that is data that we have. So then we can start looking at it. Disease pressure has not been a factor, but row width is something that we definitely can look at. Well, the reason I say that disease pressure hasn't been a factor is because we do a disease rating, and we haven't seen high disease pressure in any of our population trials. Yeah. But row width, we have that data, and I can definitely dig into that as well. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
In terms of comparing row widths and for yield, is there any thought to comparing row widths to solid planting? From what we're learning from Yen is one of the keys to yield is capturing the sunlight.
Yeah.
One of the challenges I have in my farm is keeping the weeds out in a year when the moisture's not there to get the ground covered over with soybeans.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, is there something there where maybe on an average year, on an average, might be better to solid seed at 160,000 seeds per acre versus having 15-inch rows at 160,000 seeds per acre?
And the idea behind with the weed pressure came to mind when I looked at how the potato yields were higher at 90,000 than following other crops, and I wondered if it was simply because of weed control.
I mean, weed control, if you're using GMOs, is not a big issue because you can always do it with Roundup. But if you're doing non-GMOs, that's, on our farm, that's the challenge we have is I got to get that row filled in before the 1st July. If not, I have weeds.
You're in trouble.
And in terms of going in again for a weed spray, it's a waste of time. So that's why I was talking about this with somebody the other day. We're comparing notes and we're thinking, well, you know, hey, with what the Yen is trying to show is it's all about capturing the sunlight.
Yeah.
So if we have the soybean plants all over the field versus in rows, filling in, and then all of a sudden they are capturing the sunlight, theoretically, should get better yield.
Yeah, that's one of those kind of comments, guys, that you can write on the card. Like, hey, here's a cool idea. And Alan, make sure you're writing that
Alan's
down.
taking notes, he gets paid to do that.
Good, good. So like all of this research that we do are ideas that have come from farmer groups. If you say, hey, I wonder about this, I wonder the effect of fungicides, I wonder about the effects of boron and sulfur, I wonder the effects of seeding rates. It's all ideas that have come from you guys. So the more ideas that you give us, the more research that we'll do for you, and we can get this on-farm agronomy. You want to be the first one to know the answer to these questions, become a cooperator, and we'll put the trial right on your farm.
Any more questions for Misty?
So we're going to keep digging. I appreciate coming out here today and showing you this. It's been a lot of fun getting into this data, and I look forward to getting into some more. And thanks to AGC for having me out here.
Thank you very much, Ms.